So I'm having everybody start by opening up that TI-84 app, and you go to Apps, and then you go to Finance, and then you go to TVM Solver. Who can name what the T stands for? Time. What's V stand for? Value. And what's the M stand for? Money. Time, value of money. Do you get if I said, I'm going to pay you $1 million for something, and then you do the thing I told you that, you know, like, if you do this, I'll give you $1 million. And then I said, well, I didn't say I'd give it to you right now. I'll give it to you in 100 years. Would you feel like you got ripped off?
Yes.
Yeah. Because like you said, you give me $1 million, but now you're saying it's going to be in 100 years. That's because $1 million 100 years from now is worth less because of time. See what I'm saying? What if I said, I'll give you $20 if you wait 4 years, or I'll give you $10 right now? How many of you would pick the $10 right now? It's actually probably a good call to take the $10 right now, because you could invest it and it might grow to 20, and then you've got it for sure, because maybe I'll never actually give you the 20 in 4 years. All right, so, and I get there's also the argument where, like, hey, I want to delay gratification. I'll wait and get the $20 later. But, all right, so moral of the story, time value of money is what this is about. Now, you're in that app, right? If you aren't, please get there now. The first letter is N. I want you to write on your iPad now, what is N? What is I? What is PV? And if you don't know them, leave them blank. What is PMT? What is FV? The rest of them are usually 12, 12, and end. But the others here are really important for you to know what they are. All right. Dashiell, give me one of those.
N is like the amount of months.
What is it, N? Is it like nerds? Number of months. Does it have to be months? No, but if we're using 12 and 12, then it is months. And it's usually months. And if I were you for your project, I'd put it in months. Okay, so N is number of months. Christian, what's I? Interest. That also could stand for investment income, because sometimes your investments aren't in like interest from a bank. Sometimes it's investing in stocks. PV. Aben, do you know what PV stands for?
Present value.
Very good. That's one of the trickiest ones, because if you just did a loan, it's positive. If you borrowed money, that meant somebody gave you a whole bunch of money, which was a positive thing. Okay. Next one is PMT. Abby, you know what PMT stands for? Payment. Why is that usually negative? You're paying someone or something, at least, out of your own money. Yes. That's why payments are usually negative, because it's coming out of your money and going somewhere else. Now, maybe it's going into your investment, but it's coming out of your checking account. So payments are usually negative. Are payments always negative? No, they aren't always negative. But if it's coming out of your money, that's when it's negative. How about future value? This is either really big or it's really small. Riker, can you explain why it would ever be zero?
Like a loan.
Yes, zero if it's a loan. It stands for future value. Why would we want something to be zero? Well, because if it was a loan, you want it to be paid off. And if it's an investment, we hope it's big. So that you invested money and now you got a lot of money. Okay. All right, so the number one thing that kids goof up on is having negative numbers where they're not supposed to, etc. So let's do one problem together. Everybody put in these numbers. I'm not going to tell you where to put them. I'm going to tell you a short story, and I'm going to write the key numbers down. You put them in the right spots, and then you alpha solve with your calculator, okay? You're borrowing $10,000. You know where to put that? Figure it out. You are borrowing $10,000. We'll keep it simple. You're borrowing it from me. I'm like the bank. I'm going to give you the $10,000 and you have to pay me back, right? Let's say that we pick 9% interest. The other thing we have to know is how long to pay it back. Do you get it? Would be ludicrous to say I want it back in 1 month. Well, sometimes there's like rumors, I've never done this, but I've heard of it, where people will borrow money from like a scary mobster guy and say, and he's like, you better give it back to me in 1 month. And they want interest, a lot of interest for 1 month. Okay, that more realistic is that you're going to borrow this and you're going to pay it back over the course of, let's say, 5 years. But remember, and is usually in months, because most payments that you have nowadays are in months. So don't put a 5 anywhere. You should figure out what 5 months is. Sorry, 5 years is, but put it in as months. And the last thing I want to know is what's your payment? You should know where to put everything. And you'll solve for the payment. And the follow-up question, and this is really important for those of you that are my super strong students, you probably said, that's easy, and you already have the answer. I want to help everybody though. But if you're one of my super strong students, I want to know how much total did you pay? And I don't mean the payments. I mean the grand total you paid over the course of those 5 years. You didn't just pay $10,000, right? You paid back the $10,000 plus you had to pay them interest, right? So how much total did you pay? And how much was interest? Hint, you just have to subtract off the $10,000. That's for my more advanced students. Everybody's going to have to do it for the project, but I got to first make sure you know what the payments are. I'll tell you how to do those last 2 questions, the key ones that I put in a box. I'll tell you how later, once I've checked everybody's payment. We know that that's negative 207 for the payments, and I'm rounding here. Let's just all round to negative 207 and not use any pennies. Just use that, exactly, okay? Now, if you did it in penny, it's cool. I'm fine with that. But everybody else that hasn't finished this, just use 207. How do you figure out what you paid? Somebody must know. You're paying 207. Why isn't that the answer? Because you paid it a whole bunch of times. How many times did you pay it? 60. Think about it. You're making 60 payments, right? So it's 60 times 207. If you haven't already done that, that's this. $60 times negative 207 means you paid, if you want to use second quit, it's right by the second key. It gets you out of that, the fastest that I know of anyways. And then I'm going to put my negative 207 times 60. Who beat me to 12,420. Awesome. Okay, that's the total you paid. So wait a minute, seems wrong because I borrowed 10,000 but I paid 12. What the heck?
I'm sorry.
Serious answer. All right. If I borrowed 10,000, how come I ended up paying 12? Because of interest. That's the point. That's why banks make lots of money. Sorry, I should be subtracting right here. Because the bank not only gets their 10,000 back, they get 12,000. They get 2,420 in interest. Do you get that? Did you know that on a typical house that people borrow money to buy a house? the numbers are all way bigger and you pay for so many years that in a typical scenario, you ended up paying the bank more than the whole cost of the house. So in other words, you paid for the house plus double that. So if your house was gonna cost 400 grand, by the time you're done, you didn't just pay 400 grand, you paid the interest too, and the total, you might have been $826,000 that you actually paid for your $400,000 house. Why? Because of interest. So the bank makes like 400 grand of interest off of you, but yet that's the only way you can really buy a house. You can't be just like, well, I'll just save up $400,000. I guess you could, but man, you better make a lot of money because it's going to take you forever to save up $400,000. So if you borrowed $400,000 and you do your payments thing and you come up with this, that's why it's so much bigger. It's because you only expected to pay back the $400,000. You paid $426,000 of interest. You paid $800,000, but some of that was just the money you borrowed. The rest of it is how much interest you paid. Okay. Now, the last thing in the project that a ton of kids have trouble with is this. Imagine this scenario. Everybody write this down. You're a teacher. I know you didn't probably pick that, but some people did. You're a teacher making $40,000. And then they say this weird 10% is the most you can spend of that. Why can't you spend all your money on like a boat? Well, because you have to do other things. You have to spend money on food. You have to spend money on a place to live. You have to probably spend money on a cell phone. Okay, so you can't spend all your money on a boat. How much of your money can you spend? Well, it's listed in your project, but let's say we wanted to say 10% is for this and 8% is for that. And that's the rules that they have for kind of like guidelines. They say about 25% of your income can go towards where you live. And I've actually heard that's up to 30% now. They say you can spend up to 30% of your income on where you live, like your rent. So how are you supposed to find 10% of something? You go 0.10 times the 40,000. And hint, you just move the decimal over. It ends up being $4,000. Think for a second. Do you think that means you can spend $4,000 per month? No. You only make $40,000 per year. How could you spend $4,000 per month on the thing? That's $4,000 total that you can spend. So then what if you want to make it monthly? What do you have to do? Got to divide by 12. All right, so I'd like you to do that last divide on your calculator and tell me how much, if I'm a teacher and I can only spend 10% of my money on, let's say it's a boat. I think the boat is actually like 8%. Does anybody know which percents are in the project? It's listed in there somewhere. I just can't. I wish I had printed the project out ahead of time and I'd have it right now.
The vote is 5%.
Vote is 5%? Okay. I'll do that in a second. But for 10%, 4,000 divided by 12. Do it if you haven't already, because I'm going to call on a random kid. I'll use my dice of destiny to pick the random kids. Miss Hassan, the dice chose you. What is it? 333? All right. And what is that then? That's the amount you can spend. That's 10% of the money that you make, but it's per month. All right. Would a doctor be able to spend more than a teacher? For sure. Okay. It's just unrealistic to just say, oh, everybody's going to be a doctor. It's hard to do. You got to get into med school, which is hard. You got to get A's. You don't take kids that don't have A's. I mean, I'm not saying you have to have an A in everything ever, but you have to have lots of A's to have a chance to be a doctor. And you got to borrow a bunch of money to go to med school. So that's one of the things that's in the calculation too, is like we can't just assume, oh, you'll get college for free all the way through being a doctor. There is one way I know of. One of my former students, like you, just contacted me. He's well after college now, and he's in the military. And one of the options he has is to be a doctor in the military. And if he does that, the military will pay for his med school. And you might be like, well, I'd be smart. I'd just get them to pay for my med school and then I'd quit. No, you can't do that. They will actually put you in jail. Like, they paid for your med school, then you have to work for them because they paid for it. Now, there's actually small towns that'll do that for you. Did you know that? Small towns will agree, I will put you through med school, but you have to come back and be our doctor in our small town because they can't get a doctor to come to their small town. So they're like, tell you what, we'll pay for your med school. You come back and be our doctor. Sounds like a pretty cool deal. My cousin married somebody who did that, and it was in a small town in way northern Minnesota. I think it was in Warroad, Minnesota. Anyway, and so the small town agreed to pay off his med school bills if he would just be a doctor there. And basically the way they do it is every year they just pay off some more of your med school. They're not dumb. They're not going to pay it all off on day one because then you'll stay for 2 days and leave. So they just pay, each year they pay off a chunk of your med school. So the longer you stay there long enough, med school's all paid off and they paid for it. Plus you get paid normal too. So anyway, he just got to love northern Minnesota. He learned how to have sled dogs. And so he's living in this small town and he raised a whole bunch of sled dogs and kind of a cool life. All right, so I'm just trying to give you visions of how, so because you may not have enough money to go be a doctor, there's ways you could do it. All right, so now I want to change the numbers and we'll do it, just imagine it's an engineer and they're making $80,000. I think that is actually a reasonable starting salary for an engineer. What if you needed 5% number? Because that's the most an engineer can spend on their boat is 5%. Would you please figure out the monthly number for that? Everybody, right now. Break out of your stupor. Grab your calculator. Find 5% int 0.05. And then make sure it's monthly. So if your number's really big, you probably forgot to divide it by 12. I'm going to pause for a second. Let me give this a try. Okay. Multiplied by 0.05, you are correct. And what did you get when you did the 0.05 times the 80,000?
4,000.
All right, 4,000. Is that per month then? No. That's the total that this person can spend on a boat. So if everything's going to go monthly, what did you do next? And what do you get then? 333 again. So this is 5% of a doctor's salary is the same as 10% of a teacher's salary. This isn't doctor. Sorry. This was engineer. So the engineer can afford to spend 333. Now, if you make it so that your payments are like 380, you failed the project. You can only afford 333. So if your payments are coming up to 380, so anything over 333, you have to stop and change to something else. And I'll give you the easiest way. Just buy cheaper stuff. It's not that complicated. Even a teacher can afford to buy a car. You're just not going to buy a fancy car. You just make a cheaper car, and then your payments will be small enough that you can do it. And that is the real world. Some of you are imagining yourself driving around in a super amazing sports car, and you may not be able to afford that. Maybe you can get there someday. Yes?
Can you just minus 47 for your next month?
I get what you're saying, but this is going to be every month. And if you could afford to do that, then this was a lie. Maybe it is a lie that you can only spend 5% of your paycheck on this. But if you really can only spend 5%, then this is the limit. And I know what you mean. In the real world, if I really just wanted to spend a little bit more here, I could. But do you get then in the real world, you couldn't live in as nice of a place? Because you can't afford as much for your place you're living. So you're maybe going to live in kind of a crappy place, but drive a nicer car. I get in the real world, you could make those decisions. Maybe instead of spending 25% on your house, you go, I'm going to get a cheap place to live because I don't mind living with a bunch of people. I can live in with 5 people and we'll share a house. And then my house will be cheap. And then I can drive a nicer car. But for this project, keep it to these numbers. If you really want to cheat, so to speak, then you got to find a job that pays a lot. That's also going to get you more money and get you a nicer car. It's just some people are kind of in a fantasy world on that they'll just walk right into a really high-paying job when they're super young. It can happen if you're really good at something. But it's not just going to be like we'll just choose that job that pays 5 times as much as everybody else. All right, so that percentage of your income thing is one of the biggest questions I wanted to make sure to answer. And now I think I've covered everything that you could get stuck on, but totally get that everybody in here is going to get stuck at some point in the project. Just feel free to come up and ask me, but I want to make sure you got what you have to turn in. You have to do 3 things. Number 1, you have to do an interview. And I know a lot of you haven't done it. Is there anybody who has actually completed the interview? All right, 4 or 5 people. Good job. That is seriously one of the hardest parts because you'll have to actually talk to somebody. It could be on the phone. It could be just find mom or dad and say, hey, I need to ask you some questions for this math project. Okay? So get that interview done. Where do you put those answers? In the link. It was in yesterday's folder. There's a link to a Schoology or to a Google. So there's this Google form where you answer the questions about what did this person answer? What did they say? Okay? That's one thing you have to do to get this project done. Number 2 is the actual project. Questions. That gets turned in. There's a Dropbox for it. And this is kind of weird. In the same Dropbox, you put your PowerPoint. Do you have to use PowerPoint? Nope. The project tells you 3 different common options. Sometimes people do an essay. They write up the answers to the things they ask. They ask you these like 6 questions or whatever. You can write it up as an essay. You can do a PowerPoint. Or you can have a dissertation where you will walk up to me and I will ask you a bunch of hard questions that you have to be able to answer with your calculator. If you don't want to write this all up, I'm warning you, if you try to just come up without knowing about your project, it's not going to work and you'll have to try again the next day. If you can't answer one of my questions, which I'll give you an example of one of my questions. So, how did you calculate how much interest you paid on your house? You have to look at your project and go, how did I figure out how much interest I paid on my house? If you can explain it to me, cool. You don't have to do a whole PowerPoint or a whole essay. This is the gambler's route. You can gamble that you can answer the questions. And if you can't, I'm going to say, sorry, you didn't know enough. You'll have to try again on a different day. Or maybe you just go then write it up as a PowerPoint or as an essay. And the PowerPoint can totally be Google Slides if you want to. All right? So one of these 3 things gets turned in the same Dropbox as your questions. So you'll have the questions on one page where you answer those, and then your little PowerPoint thing gets Dropboxed in the same spot. And this Google form link was in yesterday's. Maybe I can make a copy of it and paste it in today's too. And maybe, actually, wait a minute. Today and tomorrow and the next day, I think are all the same folder. So that keeps it simple. There's just one folder for the next few days. So that link should be in today's folder. All right, the rest of the time is yours to work. Tomorrow you'll have even more time to work. But by the end of tomorrow, a lot of you should be done. Even by the beginning of tomorrow, some of you should be done. During the hour, a lot of people will finish tomorrow. And then Thursday is the deadline. This is unlike most of your summatives because it can be late. Do you get on a test, you don't have a late score? If you take it a couple days late, you still get the same score? If you go past Thursday and you still haven't done it, now you've racked up a late penalty. It's gonna hurt your grade, just automatic. Like you would've got a B, now you got a C. Okay, so don't be late. Just get it over with. It's gonna take the same amount of time. Just get it done by Thursday. All right, and that's all I have for you for the video for today.